Yo! Oh!
Strain my throat a little bit with that. And nobody can do it. Nobody can do it like Angus Scrimm. Nobody can do it like him. Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness, but ours. Today we're doing something kind of interesting that I don't think we've ever done before, which is to look at an entire franchise.
Yeah, which is something, and it's something that and certainly I've really fancied doing more or less since we started this, and we've talked about this on and off for a while. Obviously, it was always going to be a bit of a big undertaking. One of the things that did kind of prompt is I think we were getting to the point where we were thinking, let's get this done, let's get it done this year. But last month, February 2025, it was announced that Reggie Bannister, who's the one of the stars of probably the hero, really, of the Phantasm series of films, is currently moved home. Is going to be moved out of hospital, moved back home, and is now receiving hospice care. And obviously, it was announced that he would very much appreciate any letters or cards from fans, which is something I really must do. But I definitely thought, this is definitely time to make it. I don't know if Reggie watches YouTube or anything like that, and God knows if he'd actually be interested in seeing a couple of middle-aged no-marks blathering on about the stuff he's done. But if so, Reggie, if by some astonishing chance you are watching this is our kind of love song tribute salute to you and to Don Coscarelli, and A. Michael Baldwin, and Bill Thornbury, and the late great Angus Scrimm, and all the people who brought the Phantasm movies to life.
Yes.
And they really wouldn't have worked without Reggie, sort of one of the most unlikely sort of movie heroes, and yet one of the most utterly loved. Although, in fact, Reggie Bannister is actually a Vietnam veteran. He was although apparently he was opposed to the war, but when he was drafted, he went.
Yeah.
And I think came with permanent hearing damage from having 50 caliber machine guns being fired off at very, very close to him. So he's actually a combat veteran. So this is a guy when you see him doing those action scenes and stuff, he's possibly doing some of this stuff with considerably more authenticity than a lot of people would think.
That's amazing. No, I had no idea. One of the things that I like most about Phantasm, and it really popped out this time, is that, like a lot of films from the very end of the 70s and the very beginning of the 1980s, it's like we talk a film down by saying, oh, it looks like, you got together with your three best friends and you made this. But yeah, it is so much that. It is so much, you got together with your three best friends and maybe a couple of other people that you knew. And you made 5 movies over a period of 30 years?
Yeah. From 1979, in fact, Ravager, the fifth film, was 2016. And given that, obviously with a lot of horror franchises, the sort of only recurring figure is normally the antagonist, normally the folks that keep getting wiped off. But this has always been about Reggie and Mike, and to another extent Jodie as well, ranged against Angus Scrimm's The Tall Man. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's one of these. I've watched it a few times, and my first, especially with the first film, was there's like these great visual scenes and eerie, bizarre moments and stuff, but it doesn't make sense. It contradicts itself. And then I watched it this time, with notebook in hand, remembering I think something Don Coscarelli said was that one way that this film could be interpreted as it's basically all the imaginations or the dream or nightmare of this young lad who's just lost his family and is dealing with bereavement. And when you look at it through those glasses, then all those connections make a lot more sense. What seem like plot holes or really jarring continuity errors aren't so much. They have that logic of nightmare. And very interesting. I mean, it's very interestingly as well how Mike, the young protagonist, is 13, which is so basically that's the age of reason. He's on the cusp of transitioning from childhood to not maybe okay, not in terms of what's the legal age to do just about anything. But
no, even though like his older brother allows him to drive a car at one point, and he's
shotgun.
Use a shotgun. He's spying on people having sex in the graveyard. He's breaking into places. He's I mean it's a very I guess not even a Stephen King childhood so much or tweenhood so much as like but very much a 1980s horror boom tweenhood where you're just running around like a maniac with no one paying any attention to you whatsoever because all the adults are equally drunk and stoned and distracted. Horny, distracted.
His parents weren't dead, then the helicopter parents were just not really a thing.
But the parents have died, and they die before the movie starts, and in a lot of ways it's sort of like Jody is abandoned as well. He has to be the only adult, he has to be the only parent, and then there's Mike who's just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do at all. He doesn't seem to go to school. He doesn't seem to.
There's a lot of things that are kind of left a bit vague on what's happening here. But I mean, for example, one example of this, of where I was thinking, this is wildly inconsistent. Doesn't make sense. Is how Mike kind of zigzags from one minute he's this tough badass driving a car and firing a shotgun, the next minute he's screaming in terror, as most of us will be. But of course, it's because he's in that kind of liminal state. He's not quite a kid anymore, but he's not an adult either. But he's in that border zone, and he's going back and forth. And so sometimes he's regressing, and he's going to Jody, who's his idealized kind of brother, who has gone off and had some sort of like we don't know exactly what Jodie's doing. Possibly you get a definite vibe that Jodie could be out. Could have been out playing rock and roll. Or
exactly.
Like
he was trying to be he was playing in a rock and roll band. He's trying to be a rock star or something like that. Doing this circuit.
Got that look. He's got the black leather jacket and of course the 1971 Barracuda. When I first saw Reggie, my first note on Reggie was when I was kind of watching this was to think, he's sort of like a man-child, an adolescent who's never quite grown up because the ponytail, and then you realize, well, actually, no, he's not. No, this is the guy who's sort of like he's older and he's kind of more aware of like the compromises you have to make. You still you do a J job as an ice cream man or whatever.
That's right.
You also. But you still also play guitar and chill with your friends and stuff like that. And it's very.
Get drunk, hit on girls, whatever.
God, some of Reggie's, especially as the series goes on, some of his kind of like, some of his kind of like chat up lines or seduction or whatever are kind of like, oh God, Reggie, please. Don't do that, Reggie. Please, we like you. This is both embarrassing and slightly creepy. But
what's kind of great is that the women are also like that. The women are also like, it's like, nah.
This is one of the things as well. It's constantly. There are times where Reggie kind of assumes this kind of heroic status, despite not having the sort of the look of a traditional. Kind of action hero, but at the same time it's often undercut, and it's often undercut by the women. Rocky, we will talk about, I'm sure, when we get to number 3.
Absolutely.
There's a character I deeply wish had been in. She does appear briefly in Ravager, but I really wish she'd been in the series more because she is such an absolutely awesome character. But one of the things about this, and it's why they keep recurring, is that they're fighting this battle. that they can never win.
Yeah.
Because because the tall man, when they're fighting the tall man, they are fighting death.
Yeah.
The whole
Logically,
thing,
it can't be overcome. And and that's the backbone of the entire thing. Is this is a series of recursive, kind of deathbed fantasies in a lot of ways. These sort of, these these dreams in the bardo, I guess, between life and death, between, accepting that you're going to have to go somewhere else, accepting that you're going to have to leave everything that you know behind, and not accepting it, being unable to do that, and to be frank, that there's a weird kind of courage in that as well.
Yeah, there was one thing that really sprang out to me when I was rewatching, especially the first one, is all these kind of like things that you would associate with symbols of masculine potency, heterosexual masculine. There's the big hot rod car, there's the shotgun, there's the 45. They're marshalling all of these again, and of course it goes almost parodic in the next companies, because of course Reggie makes his 4-barreled sawn-off shotgun.
Yes.
This insane monster of a gun that one blast will just annihilate everything.
But then you got to reload it immediately on the fly.
Yeah, I think one time he does use it. I think one of the few times he uses it in the second film. I know you've not seen the second one, but he uses it to blow away a bunch of the dwarves, and then he just with one of the triumphantly sort of tosses it aside. It's like, why would you do that? You're going to need this goddamn thing. But I mean, Reggie is kind of like more of a. I mean, the first film, the focus is definitely much more on Mike and Jodie, or seemingly, and then, but Reggie emerges as a stronger presence, and it's hilarious. I think when they think he's been bumped off, they catch up with him in the funeral home near the climax. He just mentions, oh yeah, those 2 girls that were like taken by the tall man earlier, I found them and a couple of others I hadn't seen before, and I got them out and let them go. And so he's kind of like just offhandedly off stage, he's just putting the single most heroic action of the film.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And the way that he overtakes Mike and Jodie in a lot of ways, as being, as you said, really the protagonist, but more the rooting character, the character, who's the person that you can always identify with, because we over and over we've had this argument in culture about the idea of the chosen one, and the idea of it's like, does everybody want to be Luke Skywalker? Does everyone want to be Rey Skywalker? Is it a good thing? Or is it good to just be you? And that you can be just a normal human being who isn't born with, some kind of special destiny or whatever, but you collide with something and you stand up to it. And there's and as the series goes on, it's sort of like, particularly I think in OblIVion, there's a lot of time that Reggie and Mike spend away from each other.
Yeah.
Where they're literally like writing to each other or thinking about each other or something. But they're doing their own shit. They're going on their own journeys, and
Reggie's trying to find Mike, and Mike is trying to first escape and then to find the tall man, or to discover what the tall man is, and and you kind of realize as well as it goes on, this is a game to the tall man. It's like, and I think he's quite explicit about that in Ravager, in the last film, where he sort of says, every tall man needs an amusement.
Yes.
And it's just like, well, I've had enough. I mean, even of course, it's a line that appears in the first film as well. You play a good game, boy, but now the game is finished. Now the game actually goes on for another 4 films.
Yeah.
But it is a case of he is ultimately ineluctable. He is something you can't kill death even with a massive 4-barrel shotgun.
No, you can't. You can't kill death even if you pump acid into Death's neck and melt him from the inside. You can't kill Death with one of his own balls. You can't kill him with a horde of other balls. You can't, set yourself on fire and, blow him up.
Yeah. Even when you do destroy the tall man, then another one, he will just come back through the gate in a new body.
Exactly. And so, it is one of those things where I guess, you can see the multiverse theory kind of as being inherent to the narrative. Yeah. But I sort of felt this time through that it was something that Coscarelli kind of stumbled on and went, oh, okay, well, that makes sense.
I mean, with the first one, it's very definitely, it's quite a strange stream of consciousness or almost type movie. And I think for the second one, there was a bit more
lot
pressure.
Of Dune references.
The Dune, yes, I mean the bit when he goes to see the old fortune teller and her blonde niece, and it's kind of like, put your hand in the box. It's pain. It's like, don't be afraid. Fear is the killer. But that is, of course, fear of death. If you allow your fear of death to overwhelm you, then of course it'll destroy you. You won't be able to do anything because you may not be able to escape death. You may not be able to avoid death, but it's how you use up. It's how you live that matters.
Yeah,
and you can't do that.
And to some degree, it's the briefness of life that makes life sweet. It's the fact that time is limited that sharpens us and makes us do
man exists
anything
outside that. And he does actually. I mean, I think he says in the third film, he says, "Let me release you from this fleshy construct."
Yeah.
But it was like, all that is unknown will become known to you again. And it's the again, which is, I mean, okay, there's the thing is obviously and I don't know if, so that does that imply the process of some kind of reincarnation, or does that?
I mean, yeah, to some degree. Okay. It's again, it's this interesting thing where you feel like Coscarelli is kind of not just feeling his way, but kind of dreaming his way through this thing. And it may be as simple as Mike looks a little like the tall man,
Yeah.
Michael Baldwin. He has this long, weird face, kind of horsey, kind of bony. Well, it's true. It's like he looks as good as he's ever going to look at 13. It's like
in the first film, he is this very cute, quite almost angel-faced.
Yeah, exactly. And then by the time we see him again, after he's being replaced by James LeGros, and then re-replaced, suddenly he's like this 35-year-old man or something, and he looks like a. It's funny that Civil War thing pops up later on because he looks like a Civil War soldier. He looks like he looks like a raw-boned farm guy, dying in Appomattox or something.
Yeah. And when you see him in the last film, of course, when he's sort of like there with Reggie at the end, he's having to wear like bifocals, although he has a ponytail.
Yeah, I love that.
But you can actually see but you can actually see this because if he was like 13 or thereabouts in 1979, by 2016, that's how many years later is that? That's like 37 years later.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that cute, that sweet young boy is now, a middle-aged man. Exactly. And you can see the signs of age there, and yet that ties in perfectly with the themes of what the whole thing is about.
And so, yes, you could see, there's this idea throughout, particularly brought to bear at the end of the third movie, when Mike suddenly develops like ball eyes. That sounds so bad, but.
Yeah, his eyes kind of go like silver.
His eyes suddenly look like little silver balls. There's this sort of assumption that what the tall man is trying to do is to make him into a version of himself.
Yeah.
But it is just as easy to see this entire process that all of them are going through as being, you're being pared down to your most essential parts. And, when you are ready to let go of the wish to fight and let go of the fantasy of power and let go of fantasy of rejection, then you will be able to leave the Bardo and become whatever it is that you become after that. You will be able to, maybe you do go back to the universe, when you're released from that flesh. And
I mean, one thing that struck me in the third film, because there was this whole thing of him implanting one of the spheres into, I don't know, keep calling them balls, saying he's putting his balls into the kid's head. That just sounds really wrong. He's implanting the silver spear into, and he's doing again. He's, like I say, he's got that spiel about, I'm going to release you, and your space and time will, you'll be able to, you won't be fettered by those, and everything that is unknown you'll know, and you'll know it again. It's implying it's a return, but it could also,
we come from somewhere and we are shoved into existence, into flesh, like a.
It struck me that in some ways what the tall man is maybe kind of offering here is, when you can transcend death, you can avoid death by transcending your humanity, humanity. This is like the equivalent of uploading your consciousnness into a mainframe, and it tellingly at the end of certainly at the end of part 4, Mike appears to be dying at the end of part 4. He's like, the ball has been pulled out of his head and he's lying there, and it's kind of like, and it's kind of closing in on his eye, and it goes to a little flashback, which is basically an outtake from the first Phantasm. But it's that kind of an implication that, okay, he is basically, he's going to die, but he's still going to be, he will not lose his humanity in the process.
Yes.
The only way to
he won't become whatever Jody is, stuck inside a ball, maybe throwing a construct of himself, an echo of what he was in life. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's like a bunch of people taking hits from the bong and just spinning this story. Oh yeah, man, and then this thing happens.
Again, there is this thing of dream of fantasy. Again, like you said, there's this power fantasy. There's this idea of this is something we can fight, and we can go after it with a bomb,
shotgun. We can go after it with a hot black lady. We can go after it with a handsome dwarf. We can go after it with
all these different things.
Yeah, with a huge black car with
machine guns and stuff.
Machine guns on it. Yeah,
which is like, one of the things Ravager got a lot of stick when it came out. So people were saying it is like one of the weaker entries, and I actually think it's I actually love it. I think it's a profoundly fitting and moving conclusion.
I believe that to be true as well. I'm not entirely sure that it's a movie that would hit quite as well if you hadn't seen all the movies leading up to it.
You definitely have to have.
So that, it's like it's not exactly a standalone thing. No. The way the Phantasm is, because Phantasm is just so wackadoodle, and it's so
and it's almost like with that it's like, okay, we've got 3 possibilities for how we wrap up the franchise. We can either do a sort of classic old school Phantasm adventure with Reggie blasting shit with shotguns. We can do we can pick up the kind of post-apocalyptic, or because there was always in the second and third films, there's always been this, and the fourth, there's always been this kind of pre or post or sort of just post-apocalyptic thing where all these towns are kind of
these little tiny American towns that were in the back of nowhere to begin with and didn't seem to have a lot.
It's like an apocalypse in slow motion.
Yes, exactly.
Nobody realizes everything as it lives is dying. It's kind of like we can either have the classic sort of Phantasm, or we can push it, we can turn the volume up to 11 and make the implied post-apocalyptic stuff full bore with the tall man invading, or we can go for we can do go back to our roots and do a kind of weird off the wall stream of consciousness thing where is all this just in the mind of somebody whose mind is going. And then tell you what, let's do all of them at once.
Exactly.
Let's do all three at the same time. And it works
so surprisingly well. You are perfectly correct. You know,
I mean,
by the end, where you're flipping from like scene to scene, thread to thread, pretty much every 3 minutes, you know, it absolutely works. And to some degree, the best ending that you're left with, you know, it's like, is the best ending where I go off into the sunset with my friends and I continue to fight against this unbeatable force, but we're all together and we're all human? Or is the best ending that I die in bed with my two friends and they're holding my hands and I'm peaceful?
When you say dying in bed with your two friends, maybe to clarify that as in dying in bed with my two friends, sitting by the bed and holding my hands, not like in bed. It's some kind of weird three-way thing going on.
That would be a very different film.
That would be a very different movie.
Be a different
but yeah, I mean, it works it perfectly because I mean, it kind of brings it full circle to this idea that is this thing. And to be fair, I mean, I found actually as it went on, it still managed to keep this almost unreliable narrator concept going.
It really did.
When you keep it in mind that that's the whole point, then again a lot of things that look like continuity errors or inconsistencies make sense. Like you've not seen, I know you've not rewatched the second film, but the second film basically picks up obviously where the first ends up with, you know, war, and the monsters get him, and in this Reggie rescues Michael, that you don't see Mike's face because he is no longer a Michael Baldwin, and basically clobbers a load of the doors with a baseball bat, turns on all the gas in the kitchen, and then, you know, gets them out of the window as the log fire sets off the gas and blows up the whole house. But of course the tall man just comes striding out as he always does. But then you skip
it is 4-inch heels.
Yes, to make him even taller. But then you skip forward 7 years, and by this point, you can see that Michael has turned into James LeGros, and you can also, and he's basically been committed to a psychiatric facility, and it was Reggie who had him committed because he was raving on about the tall man, and Reggie's like, "What? I've heard all. You've told me this story before. You know, I blew up my own house because it was infested by midgets. I mean, seriously." So there's right away there's the story we've seen, and then there's Reggie saying, "What are you talking about, dude?"
Yeah, exactly.
And Reggie's got a family, which we have no sign of in the first film. Whether he's got married and had a kid while Mike's been in the funny farm, we don't know. But just as they get home, boom, Reggie's house blows up, killing his family, and he and Mike and I can't remember if they actually glimpsed the tall man. Certainly he finally believes Mike, and they go on the road, and he assembles his insane 4-barrel shotgun, and Mike gets a flamethrower.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we've also got this narrative with we've got like 2, maybe 3 different voiceovers here. There's Mike, I can't remember if Reggie is voiceovering at some point in this one, but there's also this young blonde girl, Elizabeth, who is psychically gifted and has been dreaming of Mike throughout the thing, and they're being drawn closer because she knows the tall man is going to come for her. So it's kind of,
I wonder whether she was like a trip off of the old lady's granddaughter in the first movie. Yeah.
I do wonder. I mean, interesting. I mean, I remember thinking when he goes to, because you have this fortune teller scene which is pretty much standalone. You think the blonde girl in that is going to be some sort of love interest, but you see her go into the funeral home and scream, and we never see her again.
Yeah.
Possibly she's one of the ones that Reggie later, breaks out of there.
One assumes.
But I mean, it goes with the kind of dreamlike quality of the first film. But apart from it being a Dune tribute thing, you've got the maiden and you've got the crone. You've got 2 of the 3 ages of women.
Yeah.
And in terms of where the other, I mean, okay, there are some other female characters in there, but the other female character who plays a major part in the movie, of course, is the lady in lavender, who is an aspect of the tall man. Who is like not necessarily the mother, but the mature woman.
Well, yeah,
the woman who's aware of her sexuality and uses it and will kill you when you shag it, like a Black Widow. So there's all that dialogue, especially in the context of, if in the first film of this being about Mike, being in the sort of the border between childhood and adulthood, there is that kind of fascination with sex. There's the fear of sex, all of those things, and of course, so the Lavender Lady the Lavender Lady is another aspect of the tall man. She's another aspect of death. So, as I say, Freud would have had an absolute field day.
Yeah, Freud by way of Van murals,
I like that. But
Van murals from the 70s.
So the second film is much more action oriented. Apparently, Coscarelli was under some pressure from the studio. They wanted a franchise. They wanted something that was more action driven and less abstract. But again, you can see a lot of the same kind of themes recurring. And again, like I said, there's so much of the weaponry. There's this enormous bloody flamethrower. There is this massive shotgun that it would surely break your arm if you tried to use it in reality. So there are all these amped up tools of kind of male potency or whatever, and they again there's that, but ultimately they can't stop the tall man.
Well, yeah, I mean, the silver balls give way to a golden ball with all sorts of new powers and all sorts of new weapons, and
I mean, there was an interview with a priest in the second film, kind of like aware of like the tall man's depredations in his community and trying to fight him. And of course, but ultimately, while he's not portrayed as a stupid or deluded or anything like that person, he is brave, but he is very courageous, but flawed. He's scared, but he's still trying to do the right thing. Right. But it doesn't save him. He gets hung in the air by his own rosary with the crucifix turned upside down.
Man.
The tall man delivers one of his many great lines. You think when you die, you go to heaven. You come to us. And of course, the priest is later got by one of the balls. Yeah. But I mean, again, there's that thing of, well, religion doesn't seem to be much really, can even religion sort of really help us deal with this issue? No,
not really. And and as far as I can tell, in all the other movies, religion never pops up again.
No.
And we begin with this idea that when you go through these dimensional forks, these dimensional tuning forks, that you just go to one particular world, which is this hellscape, this Dune-ish hellscape, of a red desert, where all the dead are working on something. We don't know what. They sort of look like Jawas. They're running around in the desert.
I think the Jawas from. I mean, this sucks. You're dead, and they're still making you work.
I know. It's like you're working on something you had no idea was happening. It's like the end of Revival, except worse, because there isn't even the overwhelming dread. It's just sort of like, what the.
You mentioned that there was a phrase you mentioned before, that the bardo, and I'm not 100% familiar with that.
So the idea of the bardo is it's part of the Tibetan afterlife. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, essentially, it's giving you instructions on how to die. And, your body dies, and then your what makes you is going to stick around for a little while, but it'll go to a place called the bardo. And in the bardo, you are confronted with everything that you've done, and everything you've made, everything you are. But it's also where you're tempted by Maya. And you can stay there for as long as you need to. Maya is like fantasy more than anything else. It's like all the delights of life, except that you're gone from life. It's not real. It's just, it's like all the sex in the world and all the food in the world and all the, all the beauty in the world and all the music in the world and la la la. Everything that you liked best, and you have to do it over and over and over again until finally you get bored of it. and then you can move on. And the whole point is to pair yourself back until eventually you, I guess, you reach nirvana, and nirvana is nothingness. But it's also to some degree to be integrated into the universe.
At the end of you instead of being an individual consciousness, you become merged with the one, the great whole, as it
exactly. You become like the nothingness at the center of an atom, or a neutron,
the drop returning to the ocean, kind of.
Exactly. And so in a lot of ways, as this went along, I was like, oh, this is the Bardo. It's like we were just going closer, farther and farther into the Bardo. And it's interesting to me that, we're in the first movie, we're in this sort of, it's presented to you like a perfect little town, but it's not a perfect little town. It's it's just a little town. And but you get further, and the horror is you might get thrown through these forks and end up in this desert. But the further you go into that desert. It's like there's nothing else. It's like
in the third film,
little town, or the desert, or go more forks, or more forks, or more forks, or whatever's through those forks. I
think the second film, John Llewellyn Probert did a really excellent sort of review and discussion on the Arrow sort of Blu-ray set, which I used for which I watched all this with, which comes with which comes with a silver plastic, sort of ball with spikes and everything, which was just like way cool. But I think he described the second one as kind of like this great gothic road movie, which is. It is. They are heading in the second one. Mike and Reggie are following the tall man. They're following the sort of the devastation he leaves behind him. All these towns that have just been returned into ghost towns. And like I said, there's this idea that, the police, when you think about it, the only time you see a cop in any of the 5 films is in the fourth one, when Reggie is attacked by one who's actually one of the tall man's creatures.
Yeah, exactly.
There are no. There's never any. The only other reference is in the third one, because you have Tim, who's kind of like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone with with Extreme Edition kind of thing. His booby traps. Genuinely, the booby traps in the Home Alone movies would actually kill pretty much anyone they were used against if they did use them in real life. But in this one, he's setting up booby traps which are absolutely meant to kill and do. And he's quite a fun character. But like Elizabeth at the end of from the second film is summarily disposed of at the beginning of the third one, isn't it? The car blows up and you see the tall man holding up a severed blonde head, which is clearly hers. At the end of the third one, Tim is kind of like grabbed by the monsters and dragged away somewhere, and you never see or hear. Possibly everyone just thought, let's just try and forget about the Macaulay Culkin clone here. I don't know.
I guess you could say that maybe Chunk is like, grown up Tim.
Could be,
in that
work.
He's a handsome dwarf who kicks a lot of ass.
This is true. But there is this whole thing again, like I said, the police just don't even seem to exist in this world, or the authorities, or they certainly don't seem to have any kind of awareness that the tall man is going on, that town after town is being. This is
another thing that sort of gives me to understand that maybe none of this is real, that none of these places are real. Then, all of these places are, like the last sparks in a dying brain. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that cops existed. I forgot that there had to be more than 5 people living in a town. I forgot that. Really, seriously, it's like that's
Tim's dad is mentioned as being the sheriff of the local town, which is why he's one of the first people to be killed by the tall man.
Exactly. And that's why he has his dad's badge on.
An interesting thing I spotted, especially in the third film, was there's kind of a recurring rule of 3. You have this kind of trinity, which is Reggie, Jodie, and Mike, and by the third film, that's kind of like Reggie and
Tim
Rocky
and Rocky
and Tim. With Mike sort of like, where the hell are you, Mike? But you also have this kind of inverted version of it, because you have those 3 sort of like scavengers Reggie encounters when he reaches this Tim's town, who are like these kind of sleazy, depraved. And
and they are kind of like, you know, the boyfriend is kind of like a gross version of Jody, and the girl is kind of like a gross version of Rocky, a gross white version of Rocky.
Yeah.
You know? or indeed any of the other women that Reggie tries to get with. And the older guy is kind of like a gross version of Reggie.
Yeah, kind of think blonde women in these films are almost always deadly, with the possible exception of Elizabeth in the second one and the fortune teller's granddaughter. There's the woman in lavender. There's the scavenger woman in this one. In the fourth film, there is I can't remember.
Oh,
but
it's Dawn, not Dawn.
Not Dawn.
Dawn's from Ravager, but yeah.
She ends up.
Is her name Heather?
She has a pair of balls instead of spheres instead of breasts.
Yeah, that's right. And she seems like a perfectly normal person up till then, and then suddenly.
This all makes sense again if you accept this as having the logic of a dream, of a logic of a nightmare, a fantasy, and of course, again and again, you know, the sexual fantasies always turn around and bite you in the ass if you're lucky. Yes. I mean, I do love. I mean, Reggie's sort of attempts to seduce Rocky are kind of. I mean, I don't know how much of it is trying to portray when Reggie as, you know, fancying himself a ladies' man, but not really being good at it at all, and how much is just like this. Yeah, this was the 80s or the early 90s, and
so if you get with a lady, if you get within, you know, a certain distance of a lady, you have to shoot your shot immediately.
Yeah. But again, I suspect maybe one of the reasons why a lot of the women in these films are kind of like, their reaction to Reggie is to just take the piss out of him or do something rather than like kick him in the balls and run. Is because they know he isn't actually. This guy is not a predator. He's, you know, he thinks he's being this smooth operator, where he's actually being, you know, he's actually being anything but. But they also know that he isn't. That he's saying he's harmless makes him sound ineffectual. He can be quite handy with the shotgun. But I mean, I think the bit when he's trying to get on with Rocky is, "Come on, Rocky, have you ever tried vanilla?" It's like, "Didn't I just tell you dairy products give me gas?" And she's actually but she's laughing her head off because it's just she knows that is such a clumsy chat up line, and she says, "Okay, we can do it. We'll do it my way," and punches him on his back. Cuffs his hands to the bedpost, and then, despite sweet dreams, rolls over. He does actually get to have sex to Rocky, but it is literally in his dreams.
In a dream, yes.
And it is literally, and again, on fantasies of power and stuff, it's like, "Oh, Reggie, you're the best. Oh, Reggie, you're so big."
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, isn't it Jody who like shows up and starts talking to him at the same time?
It's like, "Reggie, I need you to get behind me here." And he's like, "Really? That's an unfortunate choice."
Man. Jesus.
Unfortunate choice of words. Yeah, poor Reggie cannot, even in his dreams, he cannot catch a break.
Exactly. You know, and that's that is one of the weird charms of these films. That, you know, there's a lot of slapstick, there's a lot of weird gore that kind of seems to come out of nowhere, but it's not, you know, and there's a strange amount of this sort of joshing. It's there may be like a movement towards softcore, but it's not exactly Gorno. It's you know. Actually, I was just thinking about when Jody is trying to get with the lady in lavender in the first movie, and Mike runs by screaming through the cemetery, being chased by one of the Jawas, and he like turns around and he's got her underwear hanging from his mouth, and he never spits them out. He just runs after his brother. Yeah, that's my brother. I'll be back in a minute. You know, and he runs after his brother with her underwear still in his mouth. He's just like lying on a tombstone, waiting to be serviced.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course,
becomes Angus Scrimm and just like walks away.
I mean, of course, much as he's furious with Mike, he probably doesn't know it. Mike has actually probably saved his life right there at that moment.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I mean, yeah, with Reggie, I mean, I think there's an element of Reggie as a kind of everyman. He's kind of like equal parts hero and clown.
Yes, very much.
He does show courage and he does show strength, but he's also like any other human being. He's fallible, and when faced with when faced with death and eternity and all the rest of it, he's absurd. We all are.
Yes.
But that's part of his courage and his charm. I mean, Mike is kind of almost kind of chosen one figure because the tall man clearly
has some kind of relationship with him, or is trying to have some kind of relationship with him. You know, it's like mold him into another tall man, or, you know, who knows. There's that whole thing with Dr. Morningside. And this idea that in the Civil War, or the immediately after the Civil War, Dr. Morningside, who seems to have, you know, like founded the town of Morningside, which is where Jody and Mike and Reggie all come from. And his house later becomes, you know, the house he lived in later becomes a mortuary. You know, he...
is it called the Morningside Funeral Home because that's the name of the family that owns it?
Yeah, exactly. And so Jedediah starts fucking around with tuning forks, dimensional tuning forks, trying to find some way, I think, to overcome death, because he's seen so much death during the Civil War.
Or to understand it, or to try
to understand it. Exactly. He manages to go to this all red hellscape with the Jawas, and he comes back and he is the tall man. Now, was he just erased? There's no Jedediah anymore? I think so. They actually kind of say that at one point. You know, he came back, but he wasn't himself.
Gemini Morningside never comes back. But again, possibly it's like, again, I mentioned in OblIVion, where it does seem like Mike has made the choice to die, but to die retaining his humanity. He could have
exactly. To not become another tall man, to not become another, you know, facet of death. And it's like that's the only way that you can conquer death to some degree, is to become death. Or not even death. It's more like a psychopomp, like a person who ushers you through death.
Or transfer. I mean, there is the other thing. I think I've mentioned this before. That line that modern man's greatest fear is not that death is the end, but that it isn't.
Yes.
You know, in a world where you can't be certain of everything, you can't be certain of the promises of organized religion. You can't be certain of the promises of materialism. What if there is something beyond death, but it's not like what we were told, and it could even be more? It could be even worse than things can get. Things that
you could be crawling around in the dust like a bunch of weevils as a gigantic mother bug, you know, watches over you. Because
you get when the tall man gets you, your body gets compressed down into this tiny dwarf creature.
You get pickled into a dwarf, and then, you know.
And your brain, having been shrunk as well, is then put into one of those spheres.
Yeah.
So, you know, your body is used, your mind is used, and there's no so there's no rest, there's no ending. You know, not even OblIVion.
Exactly.
It shows maybe.
That, and you know, and again, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast fairly recently, Behind the Bastards. They were doing this deep dive into the Zezians. These okay, it's a long story. There's a sort of internet-based cult or a thought experiment that a bunch of people are involved with, most of whom are obsessed with AI. It's called rationalism. And one person who sort of budded off of this had a friends group that people have been calling a cult, and eventually 6 people ended up getting murdered by people that this person had convinced that the best thing was to make themselves into psychopaths, essentially. Sith lords.
Oh.
Okay. The idea is that people are obsessed with the idea that if you make an AI that becomes sentient, it's either going to be God or it's going to be the devil. Or it might be God, but it's an evil God. I mean, the point is that these are people who have completely, they're very high tech and they're very rational and they're very, mathematically minded, and they reject everything to do with philosophy and religion, but they've essentially argued their way into making a kind of AI Calvinism, where it's like, what can we do to make sure that the AI that we create will not turn out to be a bad God that will create a hell and put us in it and torture us forever for the sin of making them. And to some degree, Phantasm kind of reminds me of that. It kind of reminds me of that sort of thing where it's very American. This idea of, on the one hand, individualism and freedom and, why? Because fuck you, that's why. And, just rejection of anything that limits you and anything that, tries to tell you, no, there are rules, you can go this far and you can't go any further. Eventually things are going to end. You are going to have to learn how to live your life accordingly. No, yeah. I refuse to accept that. It's like so much of the crap that we see happening right now seems to come out of that framework. And I gotta say that the worst people at the end of that scale seem to be people who have convinced themselves that if they only invent enough stuff, and become, and buy enough crypto and, become billionaires, that, it's like they'll never have to die. and other people, but, fuck that. Who
so
cares?
the immortality.
They're not real anyways.
Which is kind of what Jebediah did. I mean,
yeah.
Maybe Jebediah isn't necessarily seeking immortality or answers, but he manages to invent this, the dimension fork, this weird hand cranked kind of gateway to other
multiverses, to other parts.
With which he hopes to gain whatever he's after, whether it's knowledge, whether it's immortality, and he gains it, but in doing so, he ceases to be a human being. He becomes.
That's right. Yeah, he becomes utterly inhuman, and the first place that he seems to end up going is almost like this AI Calvinist hell.
We should probably talk a bit about Angus Scrimm and his performance as the tall man, because that is such a fundamental part of the whole. In fact, we've talked a lot about Reggie. We talked a lot about the protagonists of it. We haven't really talked about the antagonist, and he does kind of have that look almost of a fire and brimstone preacher, this tall figure in a dark suit, and this permanent kind of like jaw stuck out and one eye squinted. And
I mean, if he was thinner, he would remind me very much of the preacher from the second Poltergeist.
I thought you were. Julian Beck, wasn't it? Who played
yes,
that?
Julian Beck. It's like perfect casting. It's like, and of course, when you're on the edge of dying.
Yes, of course. Yes, he was terminally ill at the time, wasn't he?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, Scrimm has that kind of. I love his delivery is very much like something that is either knows the meaning of the words he's saying, but not necessarily how people are supposed to say them. Yes. How normally, it's kind of like someone who's learned sort of a language from like cassettes, and so you might deliver idiomatically correct English or whatever, but it doesn't sound like a person. The graveside service is about to begin, sir. I mean, there is a bit. It's in the fourth film, and it's one of these bits which is like a flash. Done as a flashback. It's an outtake from the where at one point Jodie has basically drag hanged the old man from a tree, the tall man from a tree, and Mike keeps hearing this voice whispering in his head, "Cut me down, boy." So he does, of course, what any normal person would do. He gets up and goes out there, to potentially let him down. And it's like, cut me down, boy. I promise I won't hurt you.
Yeah,
like,
that was an amazing scene to me because, and this is something that comes to Mike when he's hung himself from a tree.
Yes.
Yes. So it's sort of like it's this Odin-esque, 9 days and nights on the tree. I hung a sacrifice myself to myself again.
And this idea of kind of almost near-death experience, or an experience that inflicts deprivation or privation on you physically as a way of gaining.
Well, yeah, and actually, there's types of shamanism where people do that. They hang themselves, and and then you go to that place, which is just outside of life, where you can communicate with the spirit world. And
I do love the bit where Scrimm is just, the tall man is just hanging there, and he goes, "Now go away, and I won't ever come back. You will." And he just sort of goes, "Yes." And it's kind of like, would this convince anybody?
No, this would not convince anybody, even if they were 13. Even if they thought it was a dream.
But again, it's at the same time, this is how the tall man speaks. He's even if he was human once, Jebediah, whatever humanity, because Jebediah Morningside, when we meet him, is he's a perfectly pleasant guy. Yeah.
His grandmother's a little weird, and seems to live forever.
Yeah, because she bears a suspicious resemblance to the fortune teller.
Exactly.
And she just seems to pop up suddenly in Mike's car at the beginning of part 4 when he's just like driving away.
Yeah.
He's driving off into the night, and suddenly she's there cackling. And of course, spot this. And of course, inevitably, as Mike is driving away to sort of like get away from Reggie and not endanger him, but also to try and get on the trail of the tall man as Reggie follows, where are they heading? Death Valley.
Of course.
Where else would they be going? It's the perfect, the obvious destination here. Yeah, I mean, I think Angus Scrimm was quite tall anyway. Yes, they wanted him to wear the platform shoes and deliberately got a suit that was slightly too small for him to make him look even taller.
Yes.
And considering really all he has to do is scowl and deliver. I mean, he did. There's a wonderful one of the bonus features on Phantasm II is Scrimm at a convention. And he's talking, and occasionally pretending to be possessed by the tall man. It's like, you'll be nothing without me. You're just a ham actor. I wanted Basil Rathbone. Well, go dig him up. There's a bit where he just runs through all his lines. It's basically 28 words of dialogue. That's all he says. Ending, of course, with which is just fantastic. And yet, he's this really indelible presence.
Yes. No,
really
he is a like a perfect kind of psychopomp and a perfect kind of here I am, I'm I'm the ghost at the feast. I'm just like I'm the gargoyle standing over here going like, remember you will die.
And through most of the films, he doesn't look. I think his hair has gone from grey to white by the 4th one, but it's only in the 5th film where he looks genuinely frail. It's very, very telling that you don't have any of those shots of him striding towards the protagonist with his boot heels clopping.
Except in flashback. And I mean, actually, one of the saddest moments in the final film is when Reggie sees him at the rest home.
Yeah, he appears to be Jebediah as a patient.
Yeah, exactly. And, he just looks so lost and so, like...
I think this old body of mine is almost... It's almost done,
Yeah.
I hate to give you bad news, Reggie, but I think they bring us here to die.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, there's the idea of being like frozen at that moment of... to some degree, the realization of death, the realization of, oh, this is immutable. It's like, I don't know what I thought I was doing.
Talking of freezing, of course, it's another. I mean, looking at the symbolism of how of different things, of the different ways we try to deal with it. One of the things that happens in the third film is they find this big tank, cryonics tank, full of like heads, which because of course the tall man doesn't like cold, and this idea of, oh, maybe you can use cold to kind of freezing to defeat and they do actually at one point destroy the tall man's body by locking him in the cold store, but it doesn't stop him. He comes back. You can't, and so there's another way of attempt at defeating death that turns out to be a busted flush. You can't. You got the same old stuff with he's coming back, and I think it's I think it's at the end of the third film where Reggie's kind of like pinned to the wall by all the spheres, and he's saying to the kid, "Run, it's over," and the tall man just walks in and goes, "No, it's never over." And of course it isn't. It never will be over until you go down, basically.
Until you accept it, until you say, this is it. This is the end. And I am okay with that. And to some degree, I don't think those guys are ever going to say that.
No, I mean, it's a tremendous moment, I think, so at the end of Ravager, where you have Reggie, who's like apparently collapsed in the grounds of the mental hospital, and the doctor and the nurses are closing, and the doctor's getting a syringe out, and then suddenly reality just rips open, and there's Mike with a shot, with a gun. He throws the enormous, insane shotgun to Reggie, who spins around and fires, and suddenly the doctors and the nurses have turned into the tall man's graver creatures. They're blown away, and as they've been fought to a standstill, up comes the 1971 Barracuda, now armored into Mad Max mode with a Gatling gun on the business end, driven by Jodie, of course. And it's that last. It's kind of like that last kind of thing into fantasy, which I think you see in some stories, don't you? There's that kind of like with Shutter Island, rather than where the character chooses to embrace the madness, the delusion, rather than face a reality that's just too horrible to bear. That I did something horrible, my wife did something horrible, I am this awful person and I have to live in it. No, I would rather be someone trying to solve a mystery. I would rather be someone trying to do this, someone trying to do that, and if I'm not, I won't know. And that wonderful play of emotions on the doctor partner's face as he's like, okay. All right, well, but and Shutter Island also is to some degree a post-death story. It's not just the post-war, but also you're coming to terms with your life. And so I guess the only thing that I find unsatisfying about Phantasm as it is, I think I'm good with it, essentially. But the only thing that I find unsatisfying about it is that nobody gets a real life. Nobody gets like even a moment where it's like there was like 10 good years. I went to university. I was just like a normal dude. It's like, speaking of Supernatural, Sam gets that at least. He got to leave his crazy monster hunting family behind and go to university and pretend to be a normal dude. Reggie's had that at the beginning of 2. He said, by the time Michael gets out of the mental hospital, Reggie has, if he didn't have a family before, he's certainly married with a kid. Although we never see them and they're destroyed.
Well, this is the thing, it's like.
But he's had them. We don't see it because there is where would that fit into the kind of story that's being told here? But we know he's had it. And when Mike, and of course, a nice little echo here is that in the second film, when Mike gets out of the asylum, Reggie is like, I don't remember any of this stuff that you described. It didn't. This shit didn't happen. When Mike comes to see Reggie in the rest home, he's like, yes, I've heard this story before about how so the implication being there certainly is at that moment, as far as Mike's concerned, he's had a life. And he's had that life largely because of Reggie.
Yes, exactly.
Never quite sure what the relationship between of Reggie to Jodie and Mike is, because he's obviously not a unless he, how come he manages to kind of like become the carer and guardian to this 13-year-old boy.
Because there's no lawyers in town and everybody else is dead.
The lawyers all got eaten by the tall man, which maybe not such a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. In those intermittent moments where we are given the idea that maybe there's a universe where Reggie lived a normal life, looked after Mike. Mike had a whole life of his own. Maybe he has a partner. Maybe he has kids. We don't know. He might even be like a teacher or a physicist or something like that. Because he's the one who explains the whole multiverse theory.
Yes.
And he kind of looks that way. He's got the bifocals. He's got the little hair. The little ponytail, but yeah, there is this assumption that that's the only world in which they live like a normal life, a normal found family life, a normal life that's entirely about human loyalty. And
yeah,
I was best friends with this guy, and he died, and his parents died, and I looked after his brother, and everything's fine.
I mean, even though Reggie's dying in sort of like a dementia ward, there's the idea that he's had that life.
Yeah.
At least as far as he may have lived a perfectly normal life, and all this stuff has only happened in this last decline as his
sparks in a dying brain.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pretty good sparks. I mean, it's like it reminds me of some of the more whack-ass dreams that I have sometimes, where I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, that was like 5 years of my life.
I mean, it's interesting because I think some of the films I've enjoyed the most has been the ones that are often seen as lesser entries, like 3. A number of people have felt that 3 was kind of. I think some people were thinking that 3 was kind of like, there's just kind of starting to rehash the stuff from 2 here, and as I say, a lot of people have sort of not been keen on Ravager. Well, like I say, I think those are 2 of my favourites out of the franchise. There is that. I mean, there is sort of. I think the 3rd film is going for the craziest excesses out of the thing, but I mean that's often where the great stuff happens. Rather than just playing it safe, just go completely bananas and over the top. There are just so many wonderful bits in the 3rd movie. I mean, as I said, there's Rocky. Just Rocky is enough justification for every moment of
3. Yes, I agree.
Even if 3 was terrible, and I don't think it is, but even if it was otherwise terrible, it's got Rocky. That would make it terrific.
Yeah, I still think there should be like a real spin-off with her and Chunk, but
that would be great. I mean, Chunk's doing the Reggie thing as well. I mean, even though he's had a hand blown off, and it's like, can you give me a piggyback? And of course, he immediately tries to put his hand on it. But
it's like, come on, it's just one hand.
It's just one hand. It's like, you're walking. Although she does kind of imply, it's like, what do you think, you and me? Well, I don't see any other guys around. And then, of course, the car pulls up, and it's like, oh God, she's going to be fending off him and Reggie.
That's right.
She can manage. This is Rocky.
She'll be fine.
I was going to say she can beat them both off, but that's not the phrase that we really want to use here.
No. But yeah, I'm glad that you asked to do this, and it's been a nice, weirdly existential distraction from horror.
It's like so many of the best things, and you mean, as I say, going in with my notebooks in hand to actually, as I said, filled up an awful lot of pages, and two notebooks here with this thing, and I probably haven't even talked about half the stuff as good.
No, I mean, because it's full of, I don't know whether you would call it symbolism or in jokes.
There's a fine line, and how much, as you said, how much of this was like, I mean, again, I don't know how much of this was a case of Don Coscarelli sitting down and consciously thinking, I'm going to write something about, I want to write something dealing with the whole question of death and stuff, and how much just like I'm going to tell this story, I'm going to use these things, and then of course that material all rises from it. And of course there is that thing when you're looking for connections, then you find them, and you can sometimes find them whether they're there or not. People used to,
but to some degree, if something takes place over literally 30 years of someone's career, there's no way that it couldn't be a commentary on living your life.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where you're able to kind of like bring the same actors out of the stable and keep putting them back into this, and the fact that they're getting older and not the sort of the young, the cute young things they were at the beginning isn't actually a problem. In fact, it's a strength. Because that's what, like so many things, you can find all these connections, and you can find all these, and of course, as I say, when you read through it with your notebook in hand, you're spotting these things, and you'll make, and as I said, a lot of things which I thought of as, I don't get that, that's inconsistent, that's when you realise it all fits together. But of course, you can also just watch it as this is like an enormous, with a big tub of popcorn, and this is enormous, weird, creepy fun, especially 2 and 3, which are just the most kind of balls to the wall.
And I do want to see 2 at some point, but apparently it is really almost impossible to find outside of that collection that you have, because Universal has the rights to it. So every time somebody puts it up, every time somebody tries to stream it, Universal comes and gets it taken down. Yeah, well, whatever. I mean, I'm interested, and I would like to see it, but yeah, there's just something so likable about the humanity and the fallibility and the strange splatstick nutsiness of like the original bunch, as a person with a vagina, I could hope for more chicks, but there's always at least one. There's always at least one.
It's a very blokey thing. It's very, and in terms of like looking at sexuality and stuff, it is very much in terms of male heterosexual desire.
Very much. And it's like I said, it's hilarious to me the way that somebody like the chick in OblIVion will slide from, like just a normal human being, who has a backstory and is, needs a shirt to sleep in, and, is like, no, I'm not going to let you look at my naked body, whatever, it's like, thank you very much, you're really nice, but blah. And, and then you wake up and suddenly she's this monster with balls for boobs.
I always love the fact that, he does his Reggie does his kind of flirty shtick with Dawn in the last film. Who's a redhead, so at least we know. As I say, for some strange reason, blondes are always bad news in these series of films. They always turn out to be monsters. But she's a redhead, so you might have to worry about her for other reasons, but not because she's going to turn into a monster. But he does his whole act, and she's like, Reggie, you're very sweet, but pat on the head. Goes, well, I've got to write a song for you.
And then forgets her name, falls asleep.
And then she comes down to thinking, and he's fast asleep. She's just he could have actually pulled, and it's just like, oh, he's asleep. But interesting the fact that he forgets her name in the context of the dementia diagnosis.
Exactly. And then later she pops up again as Jane, the warrior woman.
Heroine of the resistance, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I understand that to some degree everybody's a trope, but the guys get to be humans and tropes at the same time.
Yeah,
that's pretty much the only commentary that I'd have.
Give Rocky her own spin-off, and
exactly.
Will Rector. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we're not even sure which way Rocky swings, because when we first meet her, her, and she's with her,
Tanisha.
she's with another. Yeah, she's with her girlfriend. Well, she refers to it as she's referred to as girlfriend, but that could just be a girlfriend as opposed to girlfriend.
I don't know. She was pretty upset. I'd be upset too.
I mean, Rocky in the third film has definitely got a bit of a kind of Grace Jones thing going on there. You wouldn't mess anyway. You're not gonna mess with her either way. But I mean, I don't think it's any accident that Reggie becomes, our kind of hero, because he is. I mean, he is like has the natural kind of comic timing, and knows how to play it for humour in a way that Jodie Jodie has the bit with the panties in his teeth and all that, admittedly, but in a way that's part of Reggie's charm. He's he always he tries to strike the kind of heroic pose and does heroic things, but he always kind of quite falls short of being the kind of figure that he's.
Well, he's very much the person who usually gets slotted into the sidekick chair, exactly. But here he gets to be the hero. Here he gets to be the hero of his own story.
Gets undercut by the things by the women he tries it on with, but also by things that go. You're never allowed to see him as this kind of like Ubermensch or superhero. You're always reminded this is an ordinary, fallible human being like you and me, trying to do the best he can.
Exactly.
And that's probably why we love Reggie. In conclusion, we stand even harder than before.
In conclusion, yes. So much fun.
Yeah. As horror franchises go, this is one that's really holds up, I think, and really has a great deal to offer and to enjoy. I mean, starting from 1979 and finishing in 2016, that's a heck of a good run.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I mean, horror franchises always suffer from the same problem, right? Which is that all the people that you got to know are going to die. All the people that you got to know and really, bonded with, it's like, how long can they survive this world? And to some degree, the very slippy, slidey, weird ass nature of Phantasm allows you to just go, well, I'm glad I had this time with you. I'm so glad we had this time together, so that you could, shoot a dwarf with a shotgun that has 4 barrels, and make him explode.
Yeehaw. Yeah. It's given me a great deal of pleasure, and it gave me a great deal of pleasure to revisit that world and rewatch all those films again.
Yeah.
And Angus Scrimm went out and starred. He looks, as I say, as we say, he looks visibly quite frail by the final film, but he has all his usual
grandeur.
Yeah, and I love how the film is dedicated, and I love how I can't remember if I don't think the first one has it at the end, but I'll have to recheck. But all of them end, with the copyright warning, and penalties may include civil liability, criminal prosecution, and the wrath of the tall man.
will include, it's like you can't get away from it. The tall man will always be there.
Yes, appear in your mirror when you least expect it. Just go, boy.
Even if you're a girl or someone non-binary.
Yeah, they, them, or something like that. Yeah, and I think sort of like foolish. What was it? It's that foolish mortals is a gender-neutral term of address.
Exactly.
Namaste, bitches. So yeah. In conclusion, I think I can't think of a great deal else to add. Can you?
No, I think we've covered everything, really. One way or the other, it's like if you have thought that you didn't want to see these films because you thought that they would be silly, ridiculous, full of gore and sex jokes and just nuttiness and make no sense and do the same thing over and over again, yes, but you might as well.
Yeah, they are still worth
they're a lot
watching.
of fun. You might as well, because they're a lot of fun.
And I think John Llewellyn Probert mentioned that there's often the feeling with these films that if you watch it one more time, it might make sense.
It will not. It will not.
So, in conclusion, the Phantasm films are, a franchise I absolutely love, and we both love. And one of the reasons that they work so well, one of them, of course, is the late great Angus Scrimm.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that has really made them what they are is the talent and the humour and the performance of Reggie Bannister. Yeah. So Reggie, like I say, if you are by some astonishing chance actually watching this video, then we send our thanks, our best wishes,
gratitude
yes. Yeah, for
very much
for everything you've done and all the many hours of joy that your work has given us.
Yes. All right.
Yeah, I think that's on that note. We've got a bit mushy there. So we will be back, of course, to lower the tone of the conversation once again, because that is what we do. But until then, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I remain Gemma Files. And this, of course, is still No Darkness, but ours.